Same question, two answers. One's useless, one's gold. The difference isn't ChatGPT, it's the prompt you typed. Most people think AI just doesn't get them, so they give up. Wrong move! A good prompt has a structure, and once you see it, ChatGPT starts reading your mind. We'll break down those components, the back and forth that turns a weak answer into the exact one you wanted, and 5 plug-and-play patterns for emails, reports, travel plans, code, anything. If you use AI at work and it keeps missing, this is the fix. Let's get into it. Prompt engineering is as much an art as it is a science. That's a very creative line. We'll come back to this after we understand what prompt engineering actually is. Prompt engineering is made up of 2 words, prompt and engineering. A prompt is simply a detailed set of guidelines or instructions given to the LLM or generative model to perform a task. Engineering is the process of developing, through iteration, a task-specific prompt to enable generative models, or LLMs, to produce the perfect or near-perfect outcome you're aiming for. So as you can see, prompt engineering is an iterative process. How? First, you get the idea. You know what you want. Then you create a prompt. You design the prompt. Then you get results. You give that to your model, like ChatGPT. And then you have to test it. You get feedback. So basically, it's a process, an iterative process. Now, once you have the prompt and you see the results, you might not be completely satisfied with the outcome. This is when you either refine your approach or have a conversation with ChatGPT, with your model, and prompt or guide the model to give you a better result, a better output that matches what you want. For example, if you have a task involving code generation, a specific problem statement can actually be solved in several different ways. For example, let's say you want to output a palindrome. A palindrome can be done using brute force. A palindrome can also be solved using a recursive method, recursion. For instance, when you give ChatGPT a prompt, it might first give you a brute force solution. You need to keep instructing and giving new prompts to ChatGPT so that it provides you with an optimized version of your code. That's an example for code generation. In the same way, let's say you have a content creation task. You want to create content, and the content you want to make is aimed at a specific target audience. Now, when you give ChatGPT a prompt, the results it shows you might not be satisfying enough. You have to tell ChatGPT or your generative model step by step what you want. Give it feedback. For example, you didn't get a good output. What you'll tell ChatGPT is, for example, this isn't what I want. Please generate the output based on my target audience or according to the feedback I've given. That's where your feedback or testing comes into play. You need to have a conversation with your generative model, or in this case, ChatGPT, giving it feedback, constant feedback. Whether it's good, bad, or if there's a specific part you want changed, let it know. All these things are part of an iterative process. That's why we say prompt engineering is an iterative process based on the guidelines or the detailed set of instructions you provide for a specific task. Now, let's look at the components of a good prompt. What we mean by a good prompt is that your ChatGPT or generative model gives you a good output, a good result, and you have less feedback to give to your ChatGPT or generative model. Now, let's look at the first 2 components, which are context and instruction. These can be interchanged depending on how you want to design your prompt. If you want to put the instruction first and then the context in your prompt, you can do that. If you want to put the context first and then the instruction, you can do that as well. Context is the additional information you want to provide to your model. Instruction is the specific task you want your model to perform. For example, if you want to summarize some text, that's your instruction. Summarize this text. Context is why you want to summarize and what outcome you want to achieve. For example, you're giving the instruction to summarize, but the context is that you want a business report. From a business report, you want to know what the profit was from 2020 to 2023, right? So that's the context you need to set. Why do you want this? Why is it needed? Next is the input data. What is your input data? For the Tesla example, the input data is your business report or business article that you'll provide to ChatGPT. And the output indicator is what and how you want the output to be. For example, you want your output in CSV format. Suppose you want it in a table format, or maybe you want it in a graphical format. So you have to specify what kind of output or what format you want the output in. So these are the 4 components of a good prompt. If your prompt includes these 4 things, you're enabling your generative model, your ChatGPT, to give you better and more accurate results. Now let's look at an example. Here, we'll look at sentiment analysis. We're setting up a context. It says, act as an analyst. You're telling your ChatGPT to act like an analyst working for an OTT platform. You're telling your ChatGPT that it will need to perform sentiment analysis based on the feedback provided by the consumers. You're working for an OTT platform. Your consumers are the users who are watching your movies and web series. Now, you have to do sentiment analysis on the feedback they provide. This is the context you're giving to your ChatGPT. Now, with this, your ChatGPT knows it needs to think from an analyst's perspective. It needs to do sentiment analysis. Now, the second part is the instruction. You're telling ChatGPT to classify the feedback as neutral, negative, or positive. Here, you're instructing or telling your ChatGPT what counts as positive. Positive means your consumer is a promoter. Negative means they're a detractor. Neutral means they're neither a promoter nor a detractor. They're neutral toward your content. This is the instruction you give about what ChatGPT or any generative model needs to do. This is what it's doing. Classifying. Next is your input data and your output indicator. Before that, let's see an example. A good prompt. When you're giving a good prompt, if you provide examples for your generative model, in this case, we're using ChatGPT, if you give it an example, it will learn from that example and use it to process your input data and generate the output. Here, we've given 2 examples. Feedback. The first feedback is, I think the series was okay. The second feedback is, the acting of each character in the series was awesome. So I think the series was okay. It took this okay as neutral. So this is a neutral sentiment. Here, awesome was taken as positive. So your sentiment becomes positive. Now, your input data is the storyline for the series was repetitive and abysmal. And your output indicator here is sentiment. What is the sentiment for this? You're asking your ChatGPT what the sentiment of this entire prompt will be. That's the context you've provided, which tells ChatGPT to act as an analyst and perform sentiment analysis. It gives an instruction to classify the feedback provided, that's your input data, and to classify that feedback as positive, negative, or neutral. Here you're giving examples for the same thing so that your ChatGPT can understand, learn, and then act accordingly. Now, the output for this particular feedback is negative. So if you copy and paste this into your ChatGPT, it gives you a negative output for the sentence. So this is how you should write your prompt, which is good. These are the components, good components for your prompt, so that the output ChatGPT generates for you is exactly what you need to work with. So this is what we've learned about the components of a good prompt. Now that you've seen the different components of a good prompt, let's take a look at a useful checklist you can keep in mind when designing an effective prompt for better results. The first one is defining the goal, telling ChatGPT exactly what you want to do. That's called defining the goal. Next is detailing the format. Format means the output format you want ChatGPT to provide you. For example, as I mentioned earlier, it could be a table, paragraph, list, CSVs, anything you want. And you can also specify it in order of priority. Ask ChatGPT to give you the results in priority order if that's what your content requires. Next is creating a role. If you remember the previous prompt we discussed while learning about the components of a good prompt, we set the context by saying, act like an analyst. That means creating a role so that ChatGPT responds or processes your request according to the role you've specified. Next is being clear about who your audience is, or clarifying who the audience is. Basically, you're telling ChatGPT to generate the output based on the demographics of the audience you're targeting. It can be beginner level, intermediate, or advanced. If you're creating any content or if you're writing code, it can be foundational, functional, or expert, depending on the audience. It can also, if you're a teacher using ChatGPT, you can specify, I want to teach fractions from a 6th grade learner's perspective. Or if you want to create content, or if you're working on something and want to help someone understand a particular concept. For example, I want a 10-year-old to understand what a prompt is. How would I help that particular learner understand? That kind of clarity, those kinds of clarifications, when you include your target audience in your prompt, it will generate tailored feedback and outputs for your prompt. Next is giving context. Basically, you are providing every possible additional piece of information in your prompt for ChatGPT so that the purpose of your request is clear to ChatGPT and the response it generates is exactly what you want. Next is giving examples. We saw in the previous components, while we were learning about them, that giving examples trains your ChatGPT or helps it understand what you want, and it learns from that to produce accurate results. Next is specifying the style. It can be communication style. If you're working with a brand, it can be how your brand operates. Communication style, such as informal or formal, whatever you want, so it's suitable for your response. Next is defining the scope. When you outline the scope with specifications, in addition to giving context and examples, ChatGPT operates within those parameters. For example, temperature. When you say, okay, I want to be creative, my temperature should be this, I want my top P to be that. You are defining the scope for your ChatGPT. Applying restrictions become things like, what is the desired length you want, the output length, the token length you want. Yes, there is a restriction, but what exactly do you want? When you apply those restrictions, those constraints will create the right boundaries for ChatGPT to produce relevant responses. So all these are checklists that you can keep in mind. Again, all these pointers in your checklist revolve around all the components of a good prompt that we've already discussed. But as a checklist, you can keep in mind that, okay, these are my pointers that I can follow when I'm designing my prompt. So this is how you can write a good prompt. So now let's understand what the different prompt patterns are. One is the persona pattern. Act as X, do the task as Y. For example, as a yoga instructor, create a beginner-friendly routine for joint mobility. For example, this is your persona pattern. Next is the audience persona pattern. For example, in the previous part, I said, explain this concept. Suppose the prompt is, explain the prompt to me, assuming that I am a 10-year-old child. Or another example could be, explain the importance of eating greens, assuming I am a skeptical child. So you're trying to tell ChatGPT what your audience persona is, and you're writing or designing your prompt with the right elements. Explain to me, assuming I'm this, or in the previous persona pattern, act like this. Next is the visualization generator pattern. I want to generate some data, for example, and provide that data to my tool. So it could be generate X that can be provided to tool Y for visualization, data analysis, or anything else. It can generate data in a table in tabular format. It can generate CSVs that you can download and provide to your tool for visualization, data analysis tasks, modeling, machine learning tasks, or anything else. So these are the first three prompt patterns: persona pattern, audience persona pattern, and visualization generator pattern. Now let's look at the next pattern, which is the recipe pattern. For example, you want to do task X, but to perform this task, there are steps or subtasks A, B, and C. So I want ChatGPT to generate a complete itinerary for me if I'm traveling from Bangalore to Darjeeling. And from there, I can take a train or a cab to Darjeeling. Now, based on this, I'm telling ChatGPT to complete my itinerary. This is a recipe pattern where you know you want to do task X, and you know that A, B, and C are the subtasks or steps necessary to accomplish that X task. So this is the recipe pattern. Next is the template pattern, where you provide, or as a user, I provide ChatGPT or the generative model with a template and placeholders so that my output, ChatGPT, fills my outputs into those placeholders. For example, if I want a day-by-day travel itinerary for visiting Paris, I tell ChatGPT to generate a day-wise travel itinerary for my trip to Paris. Now, my placeholders are the day of travel, for example, Monday. Location in Paris? What location I'm visiting? Activity? What I plan to do at that location. Time? What is the best time or best part of the day to visit or go there? This is my entire template and how I want the output to look. For each day, visit, location, at time, for activity. So if ChatGPT generates it, it will give you something like, from Monday, visit location X at noon for the activity of visiting a museum, for example. So this becomes your entire output, and you're providing the template and placeholders so that it fills in my information and generates the output in the form of this line: for day, visit location, at time, for activity, including everything. So these are your 5 prompt patterns that you can adopt when designing your prompts, so you get better responses from ChatGPT and also understand what you want to achieve. You have clarity about what you want to do and work accordingly. If you want a pattern where you want ChatGPT to act as a person, or you want to give ChatGPT an idea of what audience you're targeting, or if you're doing visualization or data analysis, what pattern do you use? If you're working on a task that includes subtasks or substeps, what pattern do you follow? And if you have a template in mind for how you want your output to be generated, then you have a template pattern. So you can keep all these 5 patterns in mind, along with your checklist, while designing your prompts. And that's it. 4 components, a checklist, and 5 patterns that turn any messy request into a prompt ChatGPT nails. Now, quick one. Are you even using the right AI? Claude has 3 modes: chat, co-work, and code, and most people pick wrong. This one shows you which. Want AI to actually do the work? Sort your emails, reply, update your sheets, no code? Start here. If this helped, hit like, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next time.